What's up, everybody? Welcome into a D&D Wednesday. Had a couple things come up during the week that I thought were interesting and we would talk about today. And then, of course, we'll do Tome of the GM as well, like we did last week. The couple of things were GM prep, and I do want to start going through that slowly. I found that when I was a beginner DM, that somebody didn't just show me how they prepped. And I really needed that. I really needed just to see how someone else does it. And it doesn't mean I'm going to do it the same way, but it at least gives me kind of a roadmap as to what I need prepared and that kind of stuff. So I won't do a full prep today, even though, we could fit that into a show, no doubt. But I won't do a full prep today. I will just show you some of the things that I prep. So for prepping GM, I think the most important thing is you're being comfortable with your own story. A lot of times I get asked, how do you come up with this big overarching plot? And to some extent, yes, you do need to do that. But I don't think it's quite as challenging as some people think it is. So there's a couple things that I do. The first thing I would tell any GM is make sure that you know your world and the people in it. And so when I say make sure that you know your world and the people in it, let's pull up here. So this is my homebrew map that I made, one of several. In fact, I have homebrew maps for almost every single one of these countries with more detail. And, around the outside, there's all kinds of detail in here. But when I first made this map, I just kind of hand drew it. And what I did is I went through and I made sure I knew one thing about each of the places that were on the map. But I didn't have full backstories for the whole thing. Then I put some conflict in the world to make sure I had something that was available to be a world driver. So I could take the characters' backstories and put them into where they fit in the world driver. Sideshow Paradox. What's up, man? I think you were here last week, weren't you? No, first time chatter. Well, appreciate having you back or having you here for the first time, whichever it is. We're just talking about GM kind of basics and tips for helping new GMs, just kind of telling them how I prepare. And it doesn't mean that you have to do it this way, but this is how I do it. And so I've now played 10 campaigns, 15 campaigns in this world that I built. And every time I do, I end up building more lore for the countries and the cities and the stories that are in this world. But real basically, I just kind of went through and had very simple descriptors for it. Now, if you look closely at the map, you can see that there are a bunch of high fantasy and sci-fi names of the cities and towns in these countries. And I did that both for me and my players to have kind of a picture in their head of what these cities look like. And so when I tell you that the capital of Soldner here, and do I have a cursor on this one? I don't. So the red country, north middle, the capital of Soldner is Arrakis. Well, when I wrote that 15 years ago, Dune wasn't as popular as it is now, but now it's a marker for people. Okay, picture Arrakis. It's similar to that. Doesn't mean it's the same thing, but you can kind of get the vibe of the city based on me putting that as the title. So it gives you just a little idea. And that's all I need for if the players, let's say the players are like down here in Pandora, right? And they ask me a question about Arrakis. Well, I have this basis of like, okay, here's just this one little piece of information that I have, and I'm going to take this one little piece of information and then vamp off of it and come up with whatever it is I need to bring it into the story. And so when you have your setting defined, it makes it easier to add stuff to it, to add it to the story. And so what I'd tell you is in your head, just have one sentence about all your locations. Now this map is huge. If you look, my scale down at the bottom here is 100 miles for every 2 squares. This is a huge world. I've had people try to cross it before. It's crazy. So you don't need to have planned out every single step along the way because they're probably not going to get there. And so then you need to hammer down and just pick one city and show it in greater detail. So for example, I've done this with a bunch of different places, but so here's my map of the country of Morkula, right? And I then, when I was using this, let's make sure you guys can see it okay. When I was going to use this country, I went into more detail on this specific country. And even this is a lot of detail for a country where they probably won't go to all these places. You know what I mean? And so then I hammered down even further into the specific city that they were using. So I took the time and I wrote out this country map. As you can see, just very basically, I marked where there were caverns, farmlands, mountain, city, town, what's the capital, and just kind of the roads that run through it. Altair is the capital. Moria is kind of an underground city. And then you got all these towns around here. And as the story got made, I ended up naming the mountains the Ursa Upper Pass. I named this road the Rochon Mentite. And it just kind of naturally came from the story that I was telling with these people. And then I hammered down even further to the city that they were in, right? And so here's Altair, and this is a wide version of the city. And even this, I did not spend too much time on, but I just, made some places, as you can see in the bottom left, that were important. So like Temple Moradin, TM, Temple Paylor, TP, which is over here. And so just to kind of give myself a map that I could use for that specific campaign. And I didn't go into this much detail anywhere else, just this one city, because that's the city that they're in and that's the city that they're going to use. So, I said on the last one that I have close, near, far, and this is an example of that, right? The close is the city. I'm going to make some more details about that so I'm prepared if they end up going, around the city and stuff like that. I've got places for them to go and people for them to meet. And then, I've got the country, which is zoomed out a little bit more, but I don't have as much detail on that. It's just some basics. And then the big picture is real basic, and this was my first drawing. Let's political, and then this is the big one, and it's really more for one-liners, you know what I mean? And if they decide to go there, then I'll spend more time fleshing out what it is. For a map like that, when I first made, I would go with my main city, 2 large towns, and 1 point of interest. that basic common traveler would know after ad need. Perfect. That's exactly what you do, right? And I wouldn't even always. I mean, so Baldur's Gate bastardized some D&D things, but one of the things, I mean, I think it did a lot of things well, but one of the things I think you can take from it is you don't start in the big city, right? You start somewhere else, you have a point of interest in between, and then you get to the big city, and I think you should do that in your games too. So 2 towns to start off with is great. Um, you know, if you look at, oh, that's Altair. Hold on. If you look at here, right? So, like, I wouldn't necessarily start my players in Altair because that's my big city. But maybe I start them in Nagrod or Belagost or New Moria or whatever, right? Um, and you have those towns kind of fleshed out, and then when you feel like they're ready for a bigger world, then you can move them to Altair. So I think that's a great idea. And then one point of interest is really interesting. That would get into game planning for me. But I hear what you're saying, and I don't think it's a bad idea. But, you know, okay, there's a wizard tower that's in the hills in between New Moria and Altair, right? Like right here-ish. Okay, that's my point of interest. Why is it interesting? Why is it there? What is there somebody there? Is it abandoned? What's the world like? You know what I mean? All that kind of stuff. I do like the point of interest. That would be getting into specific game prep, and this is kind of more, before you start a campaign, this is kind of the lens that I think that you should put it through. So, like I said, I had a lot of people ask, how do you build a big story? So, I think how you write that big story is that you have some basics of this map, this world, and then you got to find your plot line and you got to find your villain, but you can kind of insert it into the world where it fits and meld it with the lore that you have, the one sentence lore that you have for the world. So as far as the world, I would lay out the world real basically, and I think that knowledge, knowing the world like that, helps you as you write your overall storyline, which we'll get to kind of in a step 3 here. Step 2 is writing out your key players. And this is a older, just kind of key player list that I have. You don't necessarily have to make it like this, but I just kind of wanted to show this to show how like really basic I'm talking. It doesn't have to be super complicated. This is what I took into my last campaign, and this isn't even my current notes. I switched to using Obsidian. So this was my notes before I went into game, I think 1 through 3. I used the slideshow here. And so much like, for your locations, I'd tell you just to write the name of the location and a little bit about it. I do the same thing with the players here. So if you look, so here, key players, people that aren't necessarily like NPCs or player characters, but just somebody that they might know. And so Vertrumir, so I said, well, this was interesting because this ended up not being true, but he's the connection through Trogdor, which is David's character, to the Eyes of Corellon, and he's an elf rogue. And so the Eyes of Corellon, and this is on a different page, but it's a guild essentially that is like the intelligence system for the spot where the campaign had started. And this is all I have on this character. You know what I mean? I didn't write out a backstory for him or anything like that. All I have on the character is the name, who knows him, which one of the player characters knows him, what guild he works for, so you can kind of understand what his motivations or what's meaningful to him, and then know that he's an elf and know that he's a rogue, just to kind of build out a picture of him in your mind. And they ended up not interacting with him too much. I brought him back midway through the campaign to deliver a message to them, but ended up not being a huge part of the campaign. And so I both was prepared for them to talk with him, but also didn't waste a bunch of my time on a character that they didn't really pursue or were interested in. Same thing, Nia Akari. She was a contact for a different player character. She's a half-elf cleric, cleric of Maliki. And they did spend a little bit more time talking to her. And so with Ben, I kind of fleshed out, who she was and what she was doing and what I ended up making up. And so, like I said, this is my notes from before we started, so you can see I don't have it on there. But what we ended up figuring out was that he had been pushed through a portal into this world and was kind of like an orphan. His character was like teenager-ish, and when they got pushed through the portal, and so when they came through, they no parents, they didn't know anybody here, and she ended up being like a child care provider. I can't think of the word right now, but she was like the one who took him in, and she takes in all kinds of orphans at the orphanage. And we just started working through this with him and me talking at the table. But as you can see, I didn't have any of that planned out ahead of time. And so she introduced him to the king. Turns out she had a relationship with the king, not romantic, but like knew him, and had helped him out at one point. And so he had come back to her because he needed somebody from his past that he could trust, because he didn't trust the people who were around him. So he goes back to Nia because she only helped him out of the goodness of her heart, and he hasn't asked him for anything since, and so he trusts her. And she goes, yeah, I've got this person that you should talk to, and maybe you can help them out. And all of a sudden, we had an important NPC in the game that is just born from that one line of, basic, here's what it is. Then I went through and I outlined the High Council. My one PC was a princess. My other PC was around the court, like in the kingdom, and didn't know that he was part of it, but was. And so, like, they would know all these people. Does that mean necessarily that they are best friends with them or whatever? I don't know. And does it mean that they're going to be interested enough to go and learn about them? Probably not. And so, as you go through here, you can see that I've got the names for all of them. And what ended up happening was they didn't talk to any of these people. But this was the High Council before they left. And what I did here is I went and I looked up all the elven gods and built a character that would worship that elven god, and that's who these people are. So, a real easy one to kind of figure out here is Meroleth Bed, and she would be the worshiper for Selahine Moonbow, who's the god. The name I came up with was Welsh, so that's why it says Welsh there. If I translate it, if you go back in and you put that in and you translate it to Welsh, should tell you one thing about the character. That's something that I like doing. And then she's chaotic good. And this is all I wrote about Marwalaeth Bed. That's all I wrote about her. And so, as I was going through, I just wanted to be prepared if they went in and tried to talk to these people in the High Council who are decision makers and important people in the town. But it begs the question, who are they? What are their values? This is a real easy way. If I'm comparing that to the god that they worship, then I can go look up the god that they worship and be like, okay, so here's kind of their personality. This is what they're into. This is their belief system, so on and so forth. And as long as I have the name and that real basic of their personality ready, I'm ready to go if they start talking to somebody and I'm caught a little bit off guard. And then I just put the alignment there to kind of have a quick reference for when they start talking to that. I then went through and just wrote down some court members. One of them should be in this key player area. It's the contact for my one of my last player character. And so Trollus Flameheart was his name. He's a half dragon fighter. And like the other ones up here, it's real basic. And he's a court member, and we can go from there. E.S. Predator was a female drow ranger, Hand of the King. Mir Trovac, human wizard. He's part of the guild so there's a couple different guilds there. This one was Niembo Lutea. Bang, you're done. And so you can go through and you can look at all these, but this is the most amount of time I spent on any of them. But the idea was that I had a small amount prepared for these people who they might or might not talk to. So if you do that with your location and you do that with your characters, now you have things that you can ad-lib about based on what your players bring up. So I also did that with factions. You don't have to do it with factions, but I would recommend if you're starting a campaign, just make 2 or 3. I made more because I'm very comfortable with my world. But so, the one person was from Nelumbo Lutea. And I decided I was going to call it Nite, so that's why it's there. And it's a human contingent aimed at reestablishing trust with the elves. That's it. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't write a longer story about that. I can come up with that at the table. But I know just real basically that Nite is humans who are trying to regain trust and establish a relationship with the elves. And there's a whole bunch of them, right? Mithril Hammer, Fractal Conclave, the White Dwarves, Circle of the Stone Grove, so on and so forth. And so now that I have this kind of like tripod set up with my world with locations, people, and factions, now anytime that they try to, so like say they decide that they are going to venture deep into the forest and try to find some relic there. Okay, well, if they're venturing deep into the forest, the Circle of the Stone Grove would be interested. It's dwarves that have rejected the traditional nature of their kind to display a deep love for nature and protecting the wilds. So it would be interesting to see if the Circle of the Stone Grove would want to help them get this relic, or would they want to stop them from getting the relic? And then the Fractal Conclave might be interested too. It's a group dedicated to protecting the natural way of things by guarding the portals to other planes. So this relic that they get, does this help them cross any of the planes or anything like that? Maybe the Fractal Conclave is just watching and they're not necessarily interfering, because if the relic stays on this plane of existence, then they're probably okay with it. And then, okay, so it's the Circle of the Stone Grove that are going to be the people who care about them going to get this relic. Okay, so then I go here, Circle of the Stone Grove. Oops. Circle of the Stone Grove is Narava Vodnik, female dwarf druid. She's with the Circle of the Stone Grove. So now, not only do I have a faction that they need to talk to or might interact with because they're going to go get this relic that I didn't plan for, but they've decided that they're going to go get this relic. I've got a faction that might be interested in what they're doing. I can decide if that's good or bad. I've got a name of somebody who's with the faction that they know and have maybe said the name to them before. And then if you go back to the map, I can go to my More Cooler map here, and they weren't in More Cooler, but I can go to my More Cooler map here and say, okay, well, if they're trying to go find this relic, it'd probably be in the mountains somewhere here, right? Or maybe they've got to go into another country. And really, honestly, where they were was Pirota. So, if they decide that they're going to leave the capital city here and go find this relic, well, you can see it's all forest all through here. So I'm going to say that the relic is like right about here, right? So that means that they'll cross mostly forest. There won't be any roads, and they'll hit a river eventually. And when they do, that's where they can find the relic. Okay. I've got the whole thing now planned out, and I didn't write a thing for them going and getting this relic. But I've got a faction who cares, I've got a way for them to go and a map, and I've got a name for them. And that's what you get if you do this real basic, know the places, know the people, know the factions. You can vamp and kind of create that for yourself, which I think is helpful. And then the last thing, and this kind of goes into the know the people section of it, is just make up some names. I hate to make it sound so flippant, but I found that one of the things that I was worst at, that really I felt affected the flow of a game, was trying to come up with names on the fly. Inevitably, they will ask you, okay, who is this person? What's their name? And if you don't have just a list of names ready to go, then Steve, you know what I mean? And I felt like nothing affects the flow of a game more than somebody not knowing their own name. You know what I mean? So just make yourself a list of names. And what's interesting about this is some of these names then got brought into the game. So if you go back to my key players page, in like the second or third game, they ran into a guy named Bizer Red Sunder. This name was on my names list. It was not a key player, but because they ran into this guy and I needed them to run into a dwarf, and my guy Dave, who was just the one who commented here, he needed a contact in Belagost, which was one of the cities. And so I just went to my name page. I knew I needed a dwarf. I went to dwarf. I pulled Bizer Red Sunder. I moved it to here and just said Dave Guard contact in Belagost. And he's turned into one of their main contacts for the campaign. My player and him got along really well. They were able to trust each other with like a little bit of information. Then all of a sudden it became the way that they did the campaign. He became very important. They needed somebody who had the pull that he had to help them with something. And all of a sudden he became a main player in the storyline when he was just a name on my name sheet. You know what I mean? But so if you just have it, I find it's better that way. Then, because it was an elf-based campaign, I went through and I made some specific names that meant something. Because like I said, I like my names to mean something if they want to do the work. And if Dave's still watching, a little secret for you. If they want to do the work to try to figure out what the name means, great. And so here are I went through and made some elf names to introduce into the storyline that means something. So if I'm looking for a name that is maybe a little bit more meaningful than just pulling one off the list, I have these and I know what they mean. So Raito Shiepa is Japanese and it means light shaper, right? And so maybe to your point, Sideshow, if I'm trying to find a wizard, this is how I would write it instead of Pepto-Bismol. But so Raito Shiepa means light shaper in Japanese, and that would be what I made my wizard, and he uses fire spells. And there you go. And now I've got a little bit about him without really doing anything except, translating a name. So that's the way that I kind of build the world before I build the storyline. How long have we gone here? About an hour? Yeah, we can keep going. So then, and I'll probably expand on this or talk about this at a later time in a little bit more detail. But like I said, the question that you get most often is how do you come up with those plot lines? Well, first I make sure that I know the world inside and out. If I know the world really well, like I've just showed you, I can ad lib and add stuff into my story that drives them back to my storyline instead of letting the things that they want to do diverting them from the storyline. I can be creative through knowing my world and the players in it and try to drive them back to what my storyline is. I would tell people that one, check your expectations at the table. Session zeros are very helpful for this. I don't know if David's still here, but when we did our session zero for that group, they were a new group, and I'm like, well, what do you want? You know what I mean? What do you want out of this campaign? And sometimes they'll tell you that they want a horror campaign. Sometimes they'll tell you that they want sexy vampires. Sometimes they'll tell you, and this is what this group told me, well, we're playing Dungeons and Dragons for the first time. I want to fight a dragon. Okay. Tough for a level 1 character to say, but I can build a plot line where the end of the story is you take on a dragon. Dungeons and Dragons. There you go. And so that was one of the things that they said, and it made it easy for me to then try to build a plot line, a longer plot line that ends with, now I know what my ending point is, right? Ends with them fighting a dragon. Okay, so they're fighting a dragon. Now I move backwards in the sequence, and it's important that you don't plot out that entire plot line. You let them make discoveries along the way that guide you to that. But you know what your aiming point is 20, sessions in the future. It's going to be for them to fight a dragon, Oh, David is still with us. Well, he's getting a lot of good stuff here. He says session 0 was very necessary. Explore the world, fight dragons, sleep with orcs. See, and there's he's bringing up something in our game that was more of an ad lib. Daisy the orc. But yeah, so I know what I'm planning for 20 sessions out, right? And it doesn't even necessarily mean the dragon has to be the big bad, but you have to find a way for them to fight a dragon. Okay, I know that I have to set myself up for that. And then what I did was work your way backwards, right? So what are the big things? Well, they're not going to be able to fight a dragon right away, so I need to create a lieutenant for the dragon. And I would tell you in a lot of campaigns that this should be the next thing that you do. Create a big bad, and then create a lieutenant that's attainable for them. And I would tell you, create a lieutenant that's attainable for them, and then maybe even create another one that allows them to kind of progress level-wise with this big bad overseeing all of it, but somebody that they can take down, somebody that's attainable. So I built them a lieutenant, and then I built another lieutenant. And I knew that they weren't going to be able to fight dragons without some kind of epic something. They're going to need help. And people love magic items. I did more magic items in this campaign than I ever have. And to the point where I think I gave them too many because they forget to use them. But it's one of those things where, like, okay, I need to ramp up what they're capable of as a group so that they're more likely to be able to take on this dragon. And so as we go through the game, okay, what can I give them that at the end of the day for that very last fight will be helpful for them when they have to take on or want to take on the big dragon. And then around those things, you can create quests for them to go get the things to help them fight the big bad. That's all just real basic plotline making, right? So now I've got the thing that needs to happen at the end. I got the thing that needs to happen 2/3 of the way through, them taking down the lieutenant. And I got the thing that needs to happen 1/3 of the way through, which is them going and fetching all this stuff to help them take down the lieutenant and the dragon. Real basic, right? You could draw a plot line through that. There you go. There are your basics of a plot. Then what I did is I had them write the storylines, and I took their storylines and tried to weave them into my world so they made sense with each other and with my world, where I can tug on strings of their backstory to inflate the plot line that I had written. And so these are the things that I know I want them to do along the plot line. Now let's make it enticing for their player characters to want to go do those things. And there's lots of ways that you can do that. You can appeal to the person, not the character, but the player. If you know what they like, if you know what they're interested in, you can appeal to them and try to make their wants and needs. If you tug on that, that's the reason they go through the plot line. So like an example of that is like if you have a player who, loves cute little animals, right? Well, then make a cute little animal that needs saving. And even if it's not in their character, very few people, it takes a really experienced player to separate their own personal wants and needs from their character's wants and needs. So if you create the cute little animal, chances are the person that loves cute little animals is going to want to do that quest, right? Are they a power gamer? So you put a magic item out there that you know that they need that will make their character attainably better. So if they're a power gamer, you can put something in there that feeds that for them. Or you can tug on the PC. Players love their characters, right? So is it a family tie? Is it something that is, they're a cleric and they need to abide by the laws and justice. So you put someone breaking the law in there so they want to chase them. And that's how you can kind of fill in and color in that plot line that you have to make it more enticing for each of the players. What I'd tell you is make sure you're not only doing that for one of them, make sure you're doing that for all of them. At bigger tables, that can be difficult because if you've got 6 different people you're trying to weave into the plot line, that can be hard. But if you've got 6 different backstories and you've got this long plot line with endgame dragon, 2/3 of the way lieutenant, 1/3 of the way magic items, if you got 6 people to weave in, just kind of make a plan for how where you're going to bring in each of their backstories. You know what I mean? And for that, I'll point to Game of Thrones and Hodor, right? Just somebody writes a backstory. It doesn't mean it needs to pop up in session 1. And so if you've got a plan that they're going to meet Hodor when and that's going to matter when they meet the lieutenant, then you have that in your back of your mind and it's there. And I can't necessarily go into more detail in my campaign about that because one of my players is in the chat. But, for me, it was really simple because I only had 3 players at the table. So weaving their backstories in to the conversation was really easy because there's only 3 of them. But if you've got 6 of them, maybe your player that is the most veteran player and is going to have fun and play the game even if their story isn't directly involved. Maybe you wait to introduce their backstory until, 30 sessions in when you're 2/3 of the way through the campaign and you finally take down the first lieutenant, but you find out the first lieutenant was his brother. I don't know, whatever, right? You know what I mean? And you don't weave the backstory in for that specific player all the way till the end. But you've got brand new players, and so you weave in their backstory session 1 or session 5. And that way they feel this drive like, oh, this story, I'm connected to it. It matters to me. And maybe you can keep them, locked in through the entire thing by weaving in their backstory starting early. But it gives you the opportunity to have an oh my God moment 2/3 of, maybe a couple years into your campaign, you have this oh my God moment where like he was thinking about my backstory all along. And so that's how you can kind of color in that plot line. So, there's more that I would do building a campaign from scratch. This would be the preliminary work, but it's most of it. Like I gave you kind of the bare bones here, but this is most of what I would tell you to do to start off DMing a campaign. Is if you do everything that I just said, the world, the players, and the factions in it, and then you find an endpoint. You build at least 2 points between the start of the campaign and the end point. I think you got a real good, solid framework for a campaign. And then you can worry about, well, what's this session going to look like and what's the next session going to look like? And if you're real diabolical, you can maybe plan 3 to 5 sessions ahead. But, like Sideshow Paradox was saying before, your players are going to punch your plan in the face. So if you plan 5 sessions ahead, it better be really modular, and you better be able to move those things that you want to do around, so you can still work it into the storyline when they do something that's unexpected, because chances are they're going to do something that's unexpected. Okay, so that was kind of some basic GM prep for building the framework of a campaign from scratch, from the start. Like I said, I would probably spend maybe 4 hours on that much prep. We talked about it for about an hour. If I was to actually go through and build all of those things that I was saying, it'd probably take 4 hours. I'd probably break it up into 2 sessions of 2 hours, spending kind of just going through and writing all that stuff. And so if you're trying to figure out how to start a new campaign and what to do, that would be my suggestion for the framework. Spend 2 sessions of 2 hours on each of that. And then I'd tell you to plan another 2-hour session after session 0, where after you get and it doesn't have to be after session 0, after you get the backstories from the players. And that last 2-hour session, you go through and you plan your first and second session that you're going to actually run. And so now you've done all the big picture stuff, and now you go through and you plan session 1 and session 2 to try to get yourself ready and know the direction that you're going to head. I'd tell you, most of the time I'd just tell you to just plan for the next session. At the very beginning, I would plan for session 1 and session 2 to kind of give them a path to move forward on really clearly. So that would be my suggestion if you're starting off trying to build a campaign. Real basic framework. We can talk more about them in other D&D Wednesdays moving forward. I'm sure I'll do something like this again, but I just kind of wanted to get how I build the framework of a campaign out really quick.